Hey everybody, Captain Algebra here, and I'm here with a response video to Nefarious Wes's top 3 retro games that I didn't grow up with. Check out what I picked after the break. Alright guys, so here are my 3 selections for retro games, and when it came to retro I thought, anything from the Atari 2600, which is the first console I really played, all the way up to, we'll say, PS2, GameCube-ish. That's kind of what I consider retro right now. None of them went up that high, they're all kind of around the same generation. But, with that being said, let's get started. First one comes from the Super Nintendo. And it's a game that I've talked about before, and I even highlighted it in my top 10 stage theme collab that I put out a couple weeks ago. And that is Super Castlevania 4. So, I never grew up with the Castlevania games. The first one I actually got was the first Castlevania, but that didn't come until high school, and I never really played it at all. Super Castlevania 4 was the first game I actually played all the way through in the Castlevania series, and I immediately fell in love with it. Music, we already talked about that. It's fantastic. Not only bloody tears towards the end, but the entire soundtrack is amazing. Every single song is good. But just the gameplay is great. You can actually whip in 8 different directions. It's so nice. And you can do the limp whip maneuver, which can be helpful on some enemies, especially in the boss fight with Death. And the controls are just great. The visuals are awesome, and it's just a fantastic game. So I wish I would have grown up with more Castlevania games, but unfortunately I didn't, but I'm very glad this was the first one I played, as it's an excellent game. Next up comes from the Game Boy Advance, and that game is Metroid Fusion. So Metroid was another series that I really didn't play much as a kid. We had one game, Metroid 2 Return of Samus on the Game Boy, and I really enjoyed that game. I never got very far, but I enjoyed it. So I never played the original Metroid, never played Super Metroid, none of them. So eventually, once I became an adult, I did get the original Metroid, played through it, but then I really wanted the Game Boy Advance versions and Super Metroid. I can't remember which one I got first. I believe it was Fusion, and I played through it before Super Metroid, and probably won't like what I'm going to say, but Metroid Fusion's a better game than Super Metroid. It is just so fun. I love how they've got a map in it compared to the original Metroid. You still have your awesome power-ups. You got Morph Ball, you got Bomb, you got Jump Ball. You can jump off the walls really easily. You can grab onto ledges, which is fantastic. It's so nice. And it's just your solid Metroid gameplay. I really like the story of it too, how Samus is attacked by the X-Parasite and it destroys part of her suit and almost kills her until Metroid DNA is used to save her. And so you find out, oh, Metroids are the enemy of the X-Parasite, which comes into play a little bit later. And it's really cool. You start absorbing the X-Parasites and it gives you health and power-ups and stuff. And it's just really cool. The controls are very tight, and one of my favorite things is the SAX. When the SAX first appears, it's so creepy. They zoom in on the faceplate and you see the eyes. It's like, oh man, that's crazy. So the atmosphere is great. It's just such a great game. And if you haven't played it, I highly suggest you take a look. And my last game should become as no surprise really if you watch my channel, catch my live streams. I'm talking about it all the time. I actually streamed it for my second Request Tuesday. And on the NES, The Guardian Legend. So The Guardian Legend was a game that I'd heard about when I started collecting a couple years ago, and it always sounded really interesting. Part shooter, part action adventure, like that's my kind of game. But I never saw it, so I put it on my wish list for Video Games Monthly, and eventually they sent it to me, and I was really pumped to try it. But, as you can see, I've got tons of games behind me, so I needed time to find to play it. So, thankfully, I started the Request Tuesday live streams, and I believe Do You Nerd requested it, and I'm so glad they did. I had a blast. So I played it that night, had a ton of fun, and I had to play it the next day to finish it up. So like I said before, it's part shooter. You start the game, you're flying to this planet, and it's a shooter stage. Awesome. Then you land, because you're basically this, like, robot lady that is part ship, and you can also walk around. It's really cool. You land, and you hear this distress message from this guy who is trying to blow up the planet, but he couldn't, to save other planets so it doesn't happen to them. So you're tasked with breaking all the seals so you can set the self-destruct. And so every seal's in a corridor, and you've got to find power-ups, you've got to find different weapons, you've got to find chips to increase your power, and you've got to find the keys to open up certain doors. And so once you find that, you go into a corridor, there's another shooter level, you blow it up, and then there's also mini-bosses to fight, and then in each corridor there's a shooter level, and then the boss is a little bit tougher, you blow that up, the seal's destroyed, move on to the next corridor. It is so much fun. Now it gets a little repetitive at times, but the difficulty definitely ramps up towards the end. And so it keeps you on your toes, it's not like you get super bored with it. A key component is trying to figure out which weapons work best against the bosses. Because you can't just use your standard weapon the whole time. And some weapons work really well, like there's one with the laser beam in front of your ship that you can get really close to the boss and just spam it and they die quickly. Other bosses, that doesn't work so well. So a lot of strategy, and it's a great game. If you haven't checked it out, I suggest you do. So there you go, those are my top 3 retro games that I did not grow up with. A couple big ones there, I mean Castlevania, Metroid, a series that I really didn't play as a kid, and then Guardian Legend is definitely a hidden gem if you haven't played it. What are your top 3 retro games you didn't grow up with? Put it in the comments below, or, like Wes said, make a response video. Response videos are a ton of fun. So I appreciate you guys watching. Until next time, this is Captain Algebra, signing off.